So Paul Harfleet, artist, yes, and founder of the Pansy project. So yeah, I discovered you on Facebook. So thanks to the wonderful Facebook for that. And I absolutely love your art. It's absolutely fantastic. I really enjoy that. So yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself, first of all. Sort of where you hail from, where you grew up, sort of significant things in your life.
I was born in Kingston upon Thames several years ago, and I've been all around the world, not all around the world. I've moved around the country. So as a child, I lived in sort of Surrey, and then I moved to Edinburgh when I was like 14, and then I've lived in Manchester for quite a long time, but I've been back in London for like 10 years now.
Okay. Yeah.
And I studied fine art at Manchester Met.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Yeah. And when you were studying, I mean, the art, what sort of, your art now is pretty much, am I right in saying it's all birds, or do you do other art?
Well, the funny thing with the birds, well, I suppose it's interesting. It depends who's looking, but my fine art, my degree rather, was in painting.
Right.
And I was doing quite sort of, there's actually a painting, that's a painting I did on my degree, the one you can't probably see.
Yeah, it's difficult to see, yeah.
It's like a sort of skyscape. So I was kind of doing quite figurative landscape painting. And then I did that, and I kind of got more and more abstract. And then I had a year off after I got my degree. And then I did a MA at Manchester Met as well. And that's where I sort of started unpicking what it was that I was interested in terms of why the landscape was interesting to me. And I started reading a lot more about psychogeography and how we navigate the streets in general. And so that was kind of where my interest was. And I wanted to make work that was a bit more immediate than painting. So it was in this context that I experienced 3 separate incidences of homophobia on the street in Manchester in one day. So I then, within that context, I started thinking about if I should make some work about this. And I was thinking about the fact that I would walk past the place where I'd experienced this abuse every day. And what I wanted to do is kind of change how I felt about that location.
Yeah, sure.
So I started looking at roadside memorials and floral memorials in general. And I was thinking about how they do change the way you read the street. If someone puts a bouquet of flowers on the floor, you know that there's been an accident. So
yeah,
I wanted to use that kind of language to talk about the experience of homophobia on the street.
Lovely, excellent. Yeah.
And so then I had to think about the flower. So pansy was the obvious choice because of its homophobic meaning. It can be a pansy, and you can be called a pansy. I've been called a pansy before. So it was funny because initially I didn't really like the flower itself. I thought it looked a bit weak and feeble, and I wanted there to be something really celebratory and sort of confrontational or something. But actually, as over the years, I've come to love them, of course. I've planted 300 now all over the world. So I planted them, I've gone too far in the future. But I planted them for my own experience all around Manchester. I planted about 11 or 12 of experiences that I remembered when I'd been in Manchester. And I took photographs. I named the photographs after the abuse, and then I made a blog. And then I put that blog on, I shared that blog online, and I sent it to a few people, and I sent it to Queer Up North, which is a queer arts festival in Manchester. And they loved the project and wanted me to they retrospectively, if you like, commissioned me to work with them for their forthcoming festival. And this is in 2005. And so it kind of started from there, and they were very, very enthusiastic and very ambitious for the project. Immediately they could see the potential. I was still a bit like, what have I done? And it's kind of taken me this time, I suppose, just to kind of explore it. And it wasn't long before I started planting pansies for other people. Because what was amazing is that when I went back to plant the pansy, it did do something to the space. It did change the way I felt about the street where I'd experienced the abuse. It made me remember planting the pansy, not the experience of the abuse. So it was this way of layering a sort of narrative over the city and the urban environment for me. And it felt very emotional for me.
Yeah.
And it seemed to have the same sort of effect on other people when I planted pansies for them.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you kind of talked about the Pansy project there, which, you know, is what we were kind of like mainly wanting to sort of talk about. And some of the questions that I've got, you've probably answered a couple of them, but I'll go through the questions in a little while. Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly, I can imagine it's a very sort of emotional thing to take a place that something so bad has happened, and then to change that place, you know. And I totally get, you know, why you know why that would be quite a healing thing for people and for yourself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think it's an amazing idea. What made you, I suppose, thinking of flowers and memorials on the street, is that what made you come up with the idea when you were sort of like walking around, you know, and seeing these, you know, going back to these places where this had happened?
Yes, because it was around, you know, in that time when Princess Diana died. Do you remember when there was all the flowers? I remember being really struck by that as a sort of a cultural moment, that everyone was going to do this as a sort of a ritual. And I was obviously, it took me a few years to make the Pansy project from that, but it was percolating in my head about this idea of making work that was more direct and making work that was somehow healing. And it was, but I don't think I could have anticipated how healing it was when I first started doing it. And what attracts me as well is that it's kind of ridiculous what I'm doing. It's quite silly. I'm lying on the ground, planting a pansy in the street. Then I'm spending an hour or so taking a photograph lying on the ground. Yeah. People often think I've been injured or something, so I'm literally lying on the ground. So it's sort of, there's lots of different layers and ways of looking at it. And I suppose it's one of those things that I've continued and will continue to do, because it just, every time I do it and in every place I go, there's always a different version of homophobia on the streets, and different people have experienced it in different sorts of ways. And after a couple of years, I started then marking locations where people had been killed as a result of homophobic attack, which then makes it even more evocative and disturbing. And I suppose it's that kind of continues to make me interested in it. And it has a power that it's beyond what I expected it to have. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'll go through some of the questions that we got, because as we're on the sort of topic of the Pansy project, some people have sort of mentioned it, because I've actually put it onto our community page, the Proud to Be community page on Facebook, and sort of people, I did post it a while ago about your art and about the Pansy project, and then sort of decided that this would be a really good interview to do for Totnes Pride Online. And I asked people for a few questions around the Pansy project. So this is kind of like what some people have come up with. The word pansy. I mean, that was actually, I mean, you mentioned it. That was actually a common question that came up several times about, you know, using pansies and the word pansy, and how it's had that historic use of being derogatory towards gay men and just effeminate men. Was that the reason that you chose that? You know, you sort of said that you've been called that yourself.
Yes, and since then I've discovered that the reason why the pansy became associated with effeminate people is because the flower has a face, and it sort of bows its head as if it's in deep thought. And in French, the flower is called Pansy, which is thought in French. So it's sort of about being thoughtful or effeminate, or something that is deemed more feminine than masculine. And so in French, it has that double meaning, because I made a documentary in France called La Pensée de Paul, which was in France it works especially well because the flower also means like a thought. It's used on postcards like "I wish you were here." We
Right.
have, and they would send an illustrated drawing like from Avignon with a bridge in Avignon, and there'd be pansies drawn all around it. So it's sort of it's about memory and thought as well in French, but there's that kind of mixed meaning of the flower, and I think it was in Victorian times that it became sort of associated with being thoughtful in terms of term of abuse for men. But I think it's not so much used in English here. Actually, in America, it's used much more as a term of abuse. Like pansy arse is a common sort of hashtag you see on Twitter, and as an insult, which is meant to be anyone. It's almost like the equivalent of snowflake.
Yeah.
So it's sort of that kind of idea that I'm obviously very interested in the way that language works and the history of language and the history of how flowers are named and categorized by humans and bred. So the actual pansy was bred from the viola hundreds of years, and it has it's kind of Viola Wittrockiana is the Latin name, and the ones I use anyway. And there's like different subspecies and different colorways and everything like that. So I've know a lot about pansies now.
You've learned, yeah. Do you have a garden?
No, I have a balcony, and I can't. I've had pansies on the balcony before, but I can't really grow them for any length of time really. But if I live very close to Columbia Road Flower Market, and they always have pansies. That's where I tend to get my pansies.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's really interesting the way the word pansy and the flower actually had that really nice meaning of being thoughtful, and obviously, like you say, sort of more feminine, maybe sort of things that are attributed to females and being more feminine. And yet it's been taken and used as a derogatory term, that this is obviously a bad thing, to be a man and be thoughtful. And yeah, I mean, it's quite sad, really.
I think it talks about misogyny in general. So misogyny is obviously the hatred of women and anything that's feminine. And if you're a man that's displaying those symbols, it's kind of doubly troubling for white straight men. Yeah,
it is rather sad that it's been changed but and it's really nice to see that you're changing that back and actually sort of making that statement that and using these pansies as sort of to change an area back to something beautiful and something good, so
yes. And I think the thing that's for me, the power of the work for me, even if I do say so myself, is that I take the flower in the frame of the image. I make the pansy as powerful and as strong as I can possibly make it. And there's some photographs where that works super well, where the pansy is ginormous, and there's one of my favorites is in Blackpool, and Blackpool Tower is tiny, and the pansy is massive and is looking really strong and resilient and robust. And that's always my mission, is to capture the photograph of this really powerful flower that is very much associated with being very mundane and very average, and it's sort of in many people's gardens, and they might not see them as one individual flower. They don't really grow in that way. So I always have one flower which is the focus of the image, and that's part of what is my mission, I suppose, is to get the best.
Sure. And you've been all over the place with these planting these flowers. I did notice one on your I think it was on your website of the White House.
Yes. So what's been amazing is that, because I suppose I've been invited over the years to lots of different queer festivals and lots of different sort of recently more street art festivals, and I've been in lots of different books about street art and guerrilla gardening, and which has been really amazing for my profile. So over the last couple of years I've been going to America and Canada, and what I was doing, what I also did was I wrote and illustrated a children's book called Pansy Boy, which is about a boy who loves birds and loves nature and doesn't want to go back to school because he gets bullied. So he goes back to school, he gets really badly bullied, and he has this idea of planting pansies around the school. And I wrote that, it was released 3 years ago. And since then, I've been able to take that to libraries and museums and different places all around the world to kind of, and do children's workshops to sort of talk about bullying at school, really.
Yeah.
Which I suppose this gives me another way of accessing different places. So in America, I did that, and I went to Kansas, actually, the Spencer Museum of Art. And en route, I visited someone I was working with in Washington, D.C., and we planted loads of pansies around the city. And I really wanted to plant one at the White House, but my friend who was helping me was quite nervous about it because he was city. And I was like, well, I can't come to Washington, D.C. and not plant one at the White House, especially because of what Trump said. So for those of you who don't know, Trump basically said about Mike Pence, oh, don't worry about him, he wants to hang them all, in reference to gay people. So he was kind of making a joke about Mike Pence's homophobia, and it was in the White House. And of course, we all know that Trump has been kind of removing rights of trans people, etc., and people in the military, etc. So I really wanted to plant a pansy for him. And so I took a pansy there thinking it might be a challenge, but it was really busy. But the good thing about what I do is that I have to get quite far away from where I want to see the image. So I wanted to have White House in the image and be recognizable. But I also wanted the pansy to be in the foreground and powerful. So I have to get relatively far away from it. So I'm not actually right at the doorstep of the White House. But still, I managed to do it. I did it very, very quickly. Just as I was about to plant, something happened, some security incident happened, and all the security that was sort of floating around went in a direction away from me. So I quickly planted it in the lawn and took the photograph, and then we kind of went away. And my friend went white whilst I was doing it because he was so nervous about that. My plan was that I was just going to be like oh, I didn't know you couldn't do that here, Mr. Sir. I don't know, my complete ignorance, because I don't ask for permission generally. Yeah. So that's kind of adds a bit of danger to the whole experience.
Sure. Yeah, going on from that leads into another question that somebody said. Do you see it as a form of protest as well? Because like the White House one there obviously is more of a protest.
Yes, very much. It's part of the, it's almost like civil disobedience in a way, because technically I'm not allowed to plant pansies wherever I want. Some horticulturalists could be angry about this because I might be planting them in somewhere, in a place that one doesn't want pansies, but they don't tend to last very long. Often people say, can I go back and see the one at the White House? That, by the way, the next day was removed. But they tend to not last very long. But the focus is really creating the image. And often when I go and I take part in talks or whatever, I'll be talking about the issues of homophobia in that city. And in Washington, D.C., for example, there was a very, very serious problem with Black trans women being murdered and shot. Yeah, sure. And so a lot of the time I will start talking about the experience of other people who have experienced homophobia, because I'm also interested in the fact that, yes, there's terrible murders that happen and that's absolutely horrendous, but I also mark very small instances of homophobia, relatively speaking. And for me, I feel like they're very much connected. So even if someone I say even if just, but that can also be very damaging, because microaggressions can be very, very affecting. Sure. They've affected me over the years. So just as a caveat, it's still serious and should be reported, but it might not be as serious as someone being murdered, of course. So I suppose I'm interested in talking about how homophobia manifests itself, how damaging it can be, and this work highlights that as an issue. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's have a look at some of the other questions. What's people's reaction been? I mean, sort of when you're actually doing things, obviously you probably get approached at some point by people, asking you what you're doing sometimes, and also just sort of you've had exposure of your images and through various sort of places. What has the reaction been from people?
It's generally been really, really lovely, because it's one of those things that it's very difficult to be angry at some strange man planting one flower in a place.
Yeah.
And so the tricky thing is that depending on where I am and what I'm doing, and I suppose what context it's in, sometimes people could be angry, and you're not really sure. So I have to decide whether I'm going to come out, depending on who's doing the asking.
Yeah.
I have to read the person and say, okay, this person, I don't know, I don't want to make any stereotypes or any assumptions, but if that person seems friendly and open, then I will tell them the story of why I'm doing what I'm doing. If that person seems a bit confrontational, then I will perhaps just go, I'm a guerrilla gardener, I'm just doing this as a pretty thing. I don't tell them about the political context of it. And I have been stopped once for planting. I planted a pansy outside Camden City Council offices because I was in London. Well, I live in London, but I was doing a call out asking if anyone wanted me to plant. It was spring, and I planted several in this particular year, a few years ago now. And I started planting it, and someone from the council building came into the building. Sorry, my door's slamming, but it's now closed. And someone came out from the building and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm planting a pansy." And they said, "No, you can't do that here." And I was like, "Okay, well, can I just remove it once I've taken the photograph?" And he was like, "Yes, I suppose so, but just hurry up." So I was like, okay. So I was carrying on taking the photograph, ready to remove it afterwards. And then someone came past me and said, "Oh, you're the Pansy Project." Recognized that what I was doing. And I was going, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh, I work in that building, in the council building." And I was like, "Oh, I've just been told I can't plant here." He said, "Don't worry, leave it with me. I'll sort it out." So I was then able to leave the flower there. But sometimes people do recognize what I'm doing, but it's generally the reaction's just been super nice, but people just generally think it's a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, it is. It's an amazing thing to do. Have you sort of, can you sort of name some places in, like, are there any prominent, you've done the White House in America, are there any prominent places here that you've planted pansies?
Well, I planted them. I planted one very near the Houses of Parliament. It wasn't to do with Parliament, but it was, someone had, it was one of those call outs actually for that year. I think it was 2015, but it was a really brutal sort of verbal attack that had happened I'd been told about, because that's how I gather the locations generally. If there's something that is very prominently covered in the press, then I might go and plant a pansy there. But if I do a call out, people sometimes just contact me and say, "This has happened, can you come and plant a pansy?" And obviously I have to somehow make a living, so I have to kind of gauge that. But yes, Houses of Parliament was a big one. And I did one, because what I'd like to do is find landmarks that are recognizable, because sometimes you can't quite tell where I planted it, because it just looks like any city street. So any place I go, I want to make sure that there's something recognizable. A really big one was actually at the UN in Geneva. Someone who worked there told me that they were told they shouldn't come out of the UN because it was a homophobic place. So I planted a pansy there for that person. And you can see the UN and the statue in front of it and the stuff in the background. So those ones are always really sort of affecting, because they become symbolic of the location I'm at. Also, the Eiffel Tower one is one of my favorites. That was marking a really massive anti-gay marriage demonstration a few years ago. So for me, the ones where there's a very serious kind of like epic landmark that you can immediately recognize, those are the ones that I think often work the most successfully as an image.
Sure. I love the fact that you kind of take you've got a range, haven't you? Sort of like, so the sort of like you say, the sort of really sort of in prominent sort of things that happen in the newspapers, and they're really sort of big things and really serious. And then, but you sort of also speak, you get requests from people that something, and it could be something quite sort of what we would class as small. It's not small to that person, but it's more personal to that person that has taken place. And I really like that you've got that, it covers a whole range of people and events, and you know, some of them are public, some of them are personal. Yeah.
I think that's part of that process has sort of evolved over the years. In the beginning, I felt like people might want to plant them themselves, and sometimes people do, but I realized that the onus really should be on me to plant them and take the photograph in the way that I need to take the photograph, in this way I described, where the pansy is big and you can read the location from the image. So the onus really is on me, and then I need to make sure that I'm sort of covering as many different sorts of people. So if I went to Washington, DC, for example, I did a call out for locations and I had more than I could plant, but then I have to try and make sure that I'm kind of getting a nice broad cross-section of experiences from our LGBT sisters and brothers. So it's kind of like one of those things that I take really seriously in terms of making sure I'm planting them for trans murder, because that was in the beginning. I was thinking, is it the same thing? I'm not colonializing trans experience from my experience as a cisgendered gay man. I want to make sure that I'm being sensitive to that. And I've had discussions with trans people about that and checking in that that's okay for me to do. And I'm kind of sensitive to that because I think it's really important. But I do believe it's from the same root, it's from the same seed, that the kind of misogyny and homophobia are very married. And I think transphobia and homophobia are sort of mean sisters, if you like. They're just, they're kind of quite interchangeable, I think, a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely agree with that. What do you see as the future for like the Pansy project? Somebody actually asked here, would you like this to become sort of like a movement, you know, sort of a national or international movement? How do you see it sort of in the future? Is this something that you're going to carry on? Is it something that you would like other people to sort of to you know, sort of experience and be involved in? What do you see for the future for the Pansy project?
Well, I suppose, excuse me, I am an artist. So as an artist, I kind of sometimes refer to myself as an accidental activist. So my work is exploring politics and activism and those ideas of political movements. But as an artist, my focus is on creating images and creating discussions around the work. Of course, there's some part of me that would, you know, like it to be bigger and perhaps more well known. And there's been moments where I've received more press and then it sort of goes away. But I think I have to be realistic about the kind of the discussions. It's interesting to me that lots of people say, why don't I know about this? Like it's somehow my fault that the more people don't know about it. But I've had lots of press coverage and it's been, you know, in lots of books and it's really great, but it's not necessarily something that is in the mainstream. And I think that's just to do with the way that the media works and the way that the art world perhaps is accessible or not. I've sort of, because my work often exists outside the gallery, it's not necessarily seen very easily from different perspectives. So someone in a museum might think it's not quite for them, and someone for a political movement might think that's not quite for them either. So I think for me, it's part of the work is almost about liminal space. It's about the edges, and it's about the people that are being sort of missed somehow, and their experiences are being missed. And I suppose that's why I'm interested in talking to other people about it. And it's not like I'm trying to keep it a secret. It's just one of those things that, you know, I've had moments of well-knownness, but I suppose I did the book because I wanted there to have more people to have more access for it, because I feel like it's a very sort of simple, beautiful thing that I do that people could know about. And I think the book called Pansy Boy, which people can buy and share, it's one of those things. It could be looked at from a political point of view as a movement, but it really is a sort of artwork.
Yeah, I love the way that that you also take requests and to plant for people, and that is kind of a form of healing for that person. So I mean, it's almost like a little bit of a therapy thing, isn't it? That's sort of going on there, you know, for people. I think that's you know, that's really nice that's been, that we can highlight that, because like you say, not everybody hears about the project, and I suppose, you know, it's nice that people sort of know that is there, and that they can actually, you know, sort of send you a request. And yeah, I mean, you must get, do you get a lot of requests from people, or is it, you know?
Well, sometimes I'm for example, I'm going to Antwerp, even though lockdowns are still in place. I'm kind of doing a socially distant presence at an Antwerp Pride and a part of the Antwerp Queer Arts Festival. So I'm requesting locations for that. I suppose depending on when this goes out, that might have already happened, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I will be taking requests. And I suppose sometimes if I'm going to a place and it's part of a festival, I'll get too many and I can't do them all. And that's part of the issue and part of the work. But I suppose I feel like and people have done that, and they've told me they've done that, if they've experienced the abuse themselves and they want to plant a pansy themselves, they're completely welcome to do that.
Sure.
They don't even have to tell me. But sometimes people have told me that they've done it and they didn't take a picture because it was a very personal moment, and that's completely fine. And you know, I love the fact that people could access it in that way. But then it's a sort of it's sort of a manifestation of my work, but it's not actually my work. It's like it's just a nice thing. Yeah. But in terms of it being a therapeutic thing, I worked with a psychotherapist in Manchester. And she used the Pansy Project as a way of talking about cognitive analytical therapy, which is about trying to work through trauma with ritual. So it is something that can actually help. I'm not a therapist, but she was able to then see what I had done and how it could be used in that kind of way. And it is moving to do it, and it is a strange action, but the rituals can be, can't they? So yeah, I think it's one of those things that is, you know, I can't stop and wouldn't dream of stopping anyone from doing it. If they want to do it, they're more than welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for talking about the Pansy Project. You know, we'll talk a little bit about your artwork, because I suppose that's what probably caught my attention initially, and just sort of I think it was what really caught my attention. I mean, I'd seen your pictures sort of like popping up every so often. They're really gorgeous pictures. And then you started doing you were drawing the birds, and you started to dress with the same sort of colours and using the makeup. Where did that idea come from? I mean, what made you sort of think of that and do that?
It's such a funny thing, because so when, you know, at the beginning of lockdown, it was really quite dark, wasn't it? And what it still is. And of course, I think the way that it's evolved has been really interesting for me. But as it was announced, I was due to go to Aberdeen. I was doing a big festival. I was doing lots of big work. And this year, I had some really big projects coming up, and they were just all disappeared. And I was like, this is terrible. Very selfishly, that's what I was thinking. But then I started thinking, okay, so, well, what am I going to do instead? Well, I have to do something. I can't just sit here doing nothing. So I started thinking about what work I could make that would help people somehow online and share it to kind of like brighten their lives. And in my book, which I've spoken about, it's about a boy who loves birds, because I loved birds as a child and I drew them all the time. So I started thinking about, maybe I could just draw the birds that I'm seeing, because at the time of lockdown, it was just so happened to be that when no one was allowed to go to work, or they were getting up early anyway, it just so happened that they were getting up as the dawn chorus happened, because of the way spring fell and all that kind of stuff. So everyone was talking about hearing the dawn chorus and talking about birds and nature and rediscovering nature. And I was like, well, that's lovely. So I basically had this idea that maybe I could ask if people would like me to draw them a bird. So I didn't really think anything of it, and I put a post on Facebook saying, if I was to draw a bird or make a book, what bird would you like me to draw you? And I got so many requests, it was kind of overwhelming, and I still have a massively long list to get through. So I basically started drawing them, and you know, I drew the robin and the wren and the blackbird, the most popular ones, and I kind of started prioritizing if I got more than one request, because I was so overwhelmed by the requests.
Yeah.
I had to start going, okay, so I've had 4 requests for a flamingo, I better do that. So they were just all kind of just birds that people wanted to see me draw. And then as I was doing it, and I love doing it, I was taking a day to do each one because they're really detailed, and then I scan them in and I color them in digitally, because then I have the original drawing. And people asked if they could buy prints of the birds. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is something I can do that might give me some money that will replace some of the money that I've lost because I lost all my work. So I set up a print sort of shop on my website, and that made the prints available. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I should start advertising this. So I started thinking about how I would advertise, and I knew that people respond more to a face than a bird. So I started thinking, well, maybe I can just sort of just slightly start dressing to match the bird. And I remember the first one I did was the flamingo, and I wore a pink jacket and did all that stuff. And it just kind of became a silly thing. I just thought it was really silly because I was kind of doing all these kind of moody shots and myself look as great as I could, and my hair was being ridiculous, and it was just all part of that moment. And I've been living on my own, so I had the run of the flat. So I was just going, okay, well, maybe I could do this bird. And then I started thinking about makeup and bringing in color to my face to echo the birds. So, and I used to be a drag queen a long time ago, so that's how I know how to do the makeup. So
that explains why you're so good.
Yes, well, it's amazing because I had to sort of refresh my skills, and it was that everyone was also talking about glow up on television.
Right. Yeah.
So I was kind of like going, oh my god, glow up's so fun. And then it was all just like this kind of weird moment where I seemed to be making this work that people just thought was really silly and fun, but really liked the birds, and the birds were really comforting. And on social media, my social media feeds anyway, I was just sharing these images of these birds and these animations of me drawing them. It was just a way of diluting the real horror and tragedy of what was going on. I didn't want to just share the same stuff that everyone else is sharing. I wanted to kind of bring something that was a bit more positive. I suppose that's my USP as an artist, is that I want to turn things that are quite grim and highlight something beautiful that's at that same time that you could also look at.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's something that's, you know, it's a real sort of talent that you've got that you can take something that's so awful and turn it into something beautiful. And I think that makes, you know, it really sort of resonates with people, and it makes them feel so much better. And you know, the joy that it gives them to see that happening, you know. And yeah, and your birds are absolutely stunning. I'm just going to see if I can try and sort of share. Let's just. So can you see that yourself?
I can. Oh yes, I can now. Yes.
Yeah. So, what bird is this?
A hooper.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I love the way that you know, and you see, you gently reference is what the term that you use. You gently reference the birds, and I think it's, you know, that's absolutely fantastic, and what a wonderful way to advertise your print, you know, sort of. But it's kind of like run away with itself a little bit, isn't it? Because people have been so sort of taken with what you're doing in dressing up and your makeup and things, and they've been like, wow. That's amazing, you know, sort of like. And I think there's been a few people that have said, well, can I have a print of you and the birds? You know, you've had that response from people.
Yeah, so I'm slightly kind of thinking about how it could be a book. So I'm sort of working on whether it could be, because so far I've done 40 birds.
Yeah.
And I want to do 50. So I've got 10 more birds to draw. And then I've got to do 50 looks to match the bird. which I think I've only done 15. So it's a mission to do it all, but it is just so silly. It's just, and what is also, what connects it to the Pansy project is I've asked people what bird they'd like me to draw. So when I draw a bird that they've requested, you can see that they love it more and they kind of really appreciate it. And this is one of the early ones I did when I hadn't, I'm wearing makeup there, but you can't quite see it.
Yeah, it's subtle. You can just about, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it just gets more and more extreme as I'm doing it. So and I'm kind of thinking now, what's also funny is that people keep saying, God, how many clothes have you got?
Yeah.
I've always loved fashion. So it's a very strange thing for me because it's almost like it's perfectly me, this body of work, because I've always loved birds. I've always loved makeup. I've always loved fashion. And I've always loved drawing. So it's almost like this crossover.
They're merging, yeah.
And obviously I edit the photographs, of course, because I don't look like that every day. And so it's kind of, it really does make me laugh. And what's funny is that I think people get it, that it's funny. So I have to kind of sit in bed going, okay, so I've got this jacket and that shirt, and if I wear that scarf and I do this makeup, then that will be the bird.
Have you managed to use your own wardrobe, or do you actually have to go out and look for some things sometimes?
I bought one thing. I bought a green shirt because I didn't have anything that tone. But I love buying clothes that are all one color, which actually works quite well because I have got pretty much all colors. I'm missing a particular shade of green, which is tricky, but it's just so hilarious. I think it's just so funny. And the goldfinch I'm so excited about because I just remembered, I went through my entire wardrobe last night going, okay, I think I've exhausted my immediate wardrobe. So I had to go into my sort of autumn winter looks to see what I have. But the goldfinch is going to be so brilliant because it's got all of the, well, by the time this, if you edit this video, you can sweep in, bring in the goldfinch, it'll be there by then.
Yeah, sure. I definitely go through some of your, because the pictures are amazing. So I should definitely go through and add some pictures. Yeah, I mean, some of the photographs are brilliant. So
it's just so silly. I think it's so fun. And I think what's also interesting is that, I don't know whether you came across the self-isolating bird club.
That's where I found you.
I see.
Yeah.
So then someone, I don't know whether you saw that post, is that I think it was the first one I did with loads of makeup on.
It was the kingfisher.
Yes. Someone had said makeup is for women only. So I was so surprised, but I took my time because it's a funny group, of course, but it's got like thousands of members, and on there, my images are being liked so much, it's kind of overwhelming. But this woman had said that, and I was shocked and surprised, but I responded in a sort of calm, gentle way, saying, you might want to look at human history to explore men wearing makeup, and was very kind to her. But then the reaction was quite visceral to her. And I was quite sort of disturbed by that in a way. But that sort of feed, I think, was kind of blocked in the end. But she actually sent me a personal message, this woman.
Really?
So, yeah, saying that it wasn't really, I think she kind of, clearly she must have conservative views if she believes that only women can wear makeup. But it was almost like one of those, can I swear on this? Can I?
Go on, yeah.
A shit sandwich. She basically said, I don't know, I think you're very good looking, but I don't know why you need makeup, but just be your authentic male self or something weird. And I didn't respond to that because I just didn't want to get into that kind of discussion. But for me, I think this body of work continues to explore homophobia in a way, and drag and gender identity, because it's talking about beauty and makeup and gender. And also I'm very interested in how birds are named. And for example, Anna's hummingbird, I don't yet know why it's called an Anna's hummingbird. It's probably named after a white explorer who visited Brazil or South America and named that bird after his wife or daughter, because it wouldn't have been a female explorer, and it's very unlikely anyway. And so I'm interested in the kind of colonialism of bird naming and how they're named from a very European perspective often. There's exceptions, of course, like the kookaburra, which is a sort of indigenous named bird.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm really interested in that, especially in light of Black Lives Matter and the kind of colonialism and racism, and how we're taught history and how we're taught natural history. And I was very struck, because this is happening at the same time, when Christian Cooper went to Central Park. It was a story at the same day that George Floyd was murdered, and he was approached by a woman. Well, he basically was bird watching. He's a black man, bird watcher. He was said to this woman who was walking her dog, you should have that dog on a leash, because it was in the Rambles area of Central Park. Yeah. She then reacted really badly and phoned the police, saying that she'd been attacked by a black man, knowing that the police would react really badly to that. So she weaponized her racism. So I was really interested in that, and really interested in how he had been othered as just a black gay man who happens to love birds, and a whole kind of area and the movement like Black Birders Week kind of sprung up after that. So I was really interested in how racism sort of manifests itself within a natural history environment, and all of those things. So weirdly, I've somehow managed to bring in that kind of political reading of birds and ornithology and natural history, and the way that generally the white man has categorized and labeled nature. So I suppose it's part of that. And I suppose I'm exploring that by me dressing up as the birds somehow. I'm sort of exploring the fact that that bird and its associations are connected to particular things that we as humans have read. So I don't know, a wren or a robin are a favourite British birds because they are very symbolic to us for some reason. Like a robin is apparently associated with being visited by a dead relative somehow.
Yeah, it's all to do with death. Yeah.
Interesting. So it's kind of, I'm very interested in that, and that's perhaps another route I might go down. But it's so funny because it's such a new area and such a new project and it's kind of nice and refreshing to have something that's different and new alongside the Pansy project that I've been doing for 15 years. It feels like it will be something I continue to do because I love doing it and people seem to love it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely real sort of appetite out there for more and more of it, and all the comments, apart from the very odd sort of negative comment, everything is positive. But I love the fact that you challenged, the fact that people seeing this actually challenges people's views, and obviously you had a reaction to your first picture that you put on there. It really challenged this person, obviously. And a couple of others that sort of, I think there was one or two others that supported her or were sort of, arguing sort of for her. So the fact that it really sort of challenges those sort of like our views of gender and and I love that, and that was really, but it's certainly the other thing that I think it certainly sort of showed up on that particular post was how social media sort of really can be quite aggressive and nasty, because people will sort of swoop on a comment and I'm just, we kind of do it without thinking, because I commented as well. It was kind of like, I sort of like pulled the person up as well. But obviously, I mean, I try not to do it in a nasty way when I sort of comment on things like that when I see it. But there are other people that really sort of get quite aggressive and quite nasty and start name calling and, that whole horrible side of it, sort of it really sort of.
It's very strange, I think. And I think my feeling about all of that is that it's similar to the Pansy project, because the way that the incidences that I mark are often throwaway comments like "you effing F." Just someone has just said it passing by with somehow believes they have a right to infringe on my existence in life. And you wouldn't, not generally, people don't do that. You know, polite society does not approve of such activity. And it's interesting that online you do have a bit, some people have a similar or less filters or something. Because I don't think if that woman had seen me in the street, she'd have said, shouted at me saying, "Makeup is for women, what are you doing?" But I also don't think, I suppose it's an interesting thing because I took a lot of time to write very carefully my response. I was kind of wanted to be very measured and curious, really, genuinely, about why she believed what she believed. I perhaps suspected that she had very conservative views, but I didn't want to make an assumption about that. And I was kind of just sort of highlighting the history of makeup and the history of face paint and in humanity is kind of, it's part of our culture from the very beginning. So, and lots of people were sort of echoing or liking my response. And it's funny as well, because there was also in that group, there was lots of perhaps, I don't want to say outrage, but perhaps just concern that I was using it to advertise something. So I've since taken off some of the advertising.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
But I wrote something about that in a very sort of sensitive, careful, very calm way, because, you know, of course, if people don't want to see advertising in that area, then I can accept that, because you don't want to see adverts for Pepsi or something like that. Sure. I actually am just I'm me, myself, and and there's only me trying to kind of struggle through this situation. And I've not made a massive amount of money from those prints at all, but it's kind of, you know, it's just one of those things. And, you know, I think social media is a sort of a different universe in a way. So I'm interested in it, but I'm also not too, I don't really feel like I wasn't personally offended or upset by what she said to me or wrote to me, because it's just a teeny piece of work, words, a few words that I don't think she wasn't attacking me. But I can imagine and understand that if people are experiencing that kind of attention every day, it would be overwhelming. It's the same thing of having microaggressions with homophobia. If every single day you post something and you get abuse, it's really damaging. I have had a few death threats
really
from the Pansy project. I was on the ITV News a few years ago, and on Twitter I got a few death threats, and I've had a few emails sent to my website which have been really vile and said that they wanted to kill me. But I reported it to the police, of course, but nothing was really done about it. But I think it's just a very strange situation. I have to say the overwhelming majority of people have been very, very positive and kind about my work. It's not like I feel like social media should be banned because I got a bad comment.
No.
I think it's one of those things and it wasn't even a bad comment, it was just a sort of strange position.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there is that sort of awful dark side to social media, but then, you know, like you say, you don't to ban it would be all the positives and all the, you know, sort of wonderful things that happen on social media that you see, and, you know, so you don't want to sort of get rid of that, but there is always that dark side. But it was quite, I mean, for me as part of the LGBTQ plus community, seeing people's reaction on a public group that was sort of a cross section of sort of our, you know, the public, the majority of those comments were, you know, sort of backing you up and supporting you and showing outrage towards what this person had said, and that kind of made me feel, oh wow, that's really nice to see, you know. Yeah. that generally people are supportive of us, you know, as a community. So
yes, yeah. The makeup, I did some more extreme makeup after that Kingfisher, just to kind of like poke the beast a bit. And actually, the more extreme the makeup, the more they seem to like it. It's kind of, it's a funny thing, but I suppose it's, I think the media chooses to kind of minimize lots of things. They don't really allow there to be much complexity. They want people to be outraged at something that's happened online and challenge Facebook and everything. But it is just it's like an echo or a microcosm of the world. And of course, there's a bit more sort of people are a bit inappropriate. But my experience, even someone who has made work about and against homophobia and made these kind of silly things with birds, has been overwhelmingly positive. And it's sort of like a really lovely thing. And it's been really nice to contribute my work to that group, because it's been a really cute sort of experience, really. It's been a nice sort of thing. And what's been lovely is that people go, oh, I really look forward to these. They're so stupid. They're just so silly. But I think it's hilarious that people are starting to say, oh, I think you should have done this or do this, and it's just so funny and silly.
It's certainly evolving. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I'll certainly sort of be interested to see where it goes from here. And yeah, thank you so much for talking. It's been really interesting talking to you. You know, I just love what you're doing, and thank you for and just, you know, the fact that you're an activist. As an artist, you're being an activist. Now, you say it's an accidental activist, but you know what you're doing is really making a difference to people and challenging people, and I love that. I think that's great. So long may it continue, and I look forward to seeing a lot more of your work in the future. And yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me.